such a pleasure to be here again in this community. If you know my work, I usually talk about how light and nature make us feel good and delightful things. And today this will be quite different. I'm talking about a quite grim subject, and this is climate change. And I started teaching about this a couple of years ago, actually quite recently, and I've been thinking that we really don't talk enough about what's at stake. So that's my goals for today, for you, for my talk. One is that you worry about what is at stake, and secondly, that you get inspired to do more in this direction. So you have definitely seen, Marcel also introduced this already, there is an increasing change in global temperature in the world. We can already see this. There's a dramatic increase. This is compared to the yearly average in the last 50 years, since 2010. Amsterdam, representing the Netherlands, where I live, and Copenhagen for here. So there is absolutely no doubt that this is happening, and this is a result of human action. And I'm quoting the IPCC report. This is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This is, I think, an amazing feat. In the latest report, 270 scientists from different disciplines joined forces and established scientific consensus about the effect of human actions on climate change and what our pathways forward. And what they tell us, and this time it's as clear as it can be, the choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years. For me, it makes my skin crawl. Things we do as a species affect the whole planet. And there are irreversible damages happening. Sorry, as you see, I'm getting quite emotional. So every increment of global warming, sorry, that was unexpected.
No worries, Kynthia. Keep going. That's the beauty of being live.
Yeah, I see, sure, and recorded. So, yeah, we might think, well, it's just degrees of change. Why does it matter? And the more I was reading in this report, the more I kept, maybe a tissue would be a good idea. Thank you. The more I was thinking,
you can sip a bit.
Good idea. That's really, yeah, what does it matter? And it does. Every single increment of global warming intensifies the effects I'm going to discuss in a moment when I get my bearings.
There you go.
Thank you. Well, you were saying about an emotional video that you saw at the conference. There's another one coming. So, let's see, how bad does it get? These are observed impacts today from, they're widespread, they're global, and they're happening now. This is from the IPCC report. They're discussing changes in water availability, having too much or very often having too little, and food production, especially agriculture and fisheries, their crop yield is decreasing. And there is forced displacement because of climate change. And we also see growing damages to cities and infrastructure. Think of flooding, think of damages to key economic sectors. And this relates to poverty, hunger, lack of drinking water, and of course all this pressure leads to increased interpersonal conflicts, both within and between nations. This is definitely something very much in our minds in the last years, fear of war, and these three together with climate change, actually happen to be the three most common responses when people in Europe are asked, what is the single most serious problem that the world is facing today? And in my view, if you worry about any of these, poverty, hunger, lack of drinking water, increased interpersonal conflicts, you should worry even more about climate change, because this will only make this problem increase. And there's not only climate change to worry about. So climate change is actually 1 out of 9 critical processes for maintaining stability and resilience in Earth. And I don't have time to go into all of them. I'm introducing a few, but these are boundaries that have been established as the safe limits for Earth processes. And they're very much interconnected. Climate change specifically is one that has the most substantial effects on the remaining boundaries, from what I understand. This is not my domain, as you realize. So we have climate change, the increase in global temperature from trapped radiation due to greenhouse gas emissions. And, of course, when you have more increased temperature, this increases the risk of wildfires. You have seen hundreds by now in the news in the last years. Every time this happens, we have destruction of forest areas, which is another planetary boundary called land system change. With every wildfire, animals and ecosystems die. This is another planetary boundary called biosphere integrity, about the decline in diversity and health of organisms and ecosystems. And the picture is very, very, very grim. In the latest assessment of these planetary boundaries, 6 out of 9 boundaries have been crossed. This is really a call for action, a call for help from Earth scientists. Again, that's not my expertise, it's theirs. And they're saying we are crossing these limits and we are really in a position of instability. These are interconnected systems that will have, from what I understand, abrupt and irreversible changes in processes in the Earth. And you might say, okay, Kynthia, thanks for the news. Anything good? How are we doing in this? This sounds terrible. And I don't have good news to tell you. I can tell you that so far the pledges that have been are in place are for limiting the degree of global warming to 2 degrees, which already will have all these impacts that I'm talking about. The question is how much? So the targets from the IPCC report, which was, okay, let's aim for 1.5 degrees increase as a reasonable, still needing drastic action. Well, we're not even there, even with the pledges that we have, not what is actually happening. What is happening, the current policies that are implemented, we're on the road for 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius. And you say, okay, well, whose fault is it? Who should act about this? You might have discussed this with others or heard in the news, and you say, okay, well, Asia is emitting a lot, and the Middle East are developing, it's their fault. Well, I saw this graph and I found it just incredible. This is brilliant work from Professor Hickel. I highly recommend reading his book. He calculated beyond the safe boundary for climate change, this single boundary we're talking about, so all the excess emissions since pre-industrial times, who is responsible for these? Well, it turns out the Global South, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia, think how much of the Earth we're talking about, have only emitted 8%. 8%. The remaining 82% comes from the global north, and out of those, 42% have been emitted in Europe. So to me, this means I need to do something, and not only I need to do something now, but really, I should, well, it's not my fault exactly, but also it is. So I have lots of conflicted feelings, very happy to talk about this later. So, well, why am I here? I'm happy to discuss more about what we can do as individuals, my failures in this, systemic problems, but also I think there's many things we can do as a field in daylighting. And in my view, this really requires that we join forces. And I have 3 topics that come to my mind. I'm very interested in hearing more. So the points I want to make are resilient design choices. So going back to Marcel as well, establishing the value of daylight, which is what we discussed a lot also in the panel, was discussed in the previous session, and also cross-disciplinary synergies. Resilient design choices. Recent studies recommend that to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions and carbon dioxide equivalent emissions of buildings, one path forward would be to aim for a 210 building lifespan. And this got me thinking, are we really ready to build buildings with an expected lifespan of 210 years, especially in a changing climate. And there are many different methods for doing this, for generating future weather files. And there exist also methods for different climate change scenarios, which is, by the way, really tricky because you have, and there's a lot of uncertainty. On one hand, you have possible policies that might be or not be adopted. And on the other hand, you have socioeconomic factors, for example, population growth. But you can use these models, and for building performance modeling, the input for transforming the data and creating different weather files representing variations in climate, the input is usually typical weather files, for example, typical meteorological year data. And when looking into this for daylighting, I found this brilliant work by Eleonora and John, who is somewhere in the audience, both speakers at the conference, who found that actually for illuminance data, when we compare this typical meteorological year that is really commonly used, these are quite far from actual meteorological year data derived from satellites. To me, as a user, this means that first of all, we need reliable data, even if we don't plan to design for 200 years in the future. And also with the growing occurrence of extreme weather, it's really necessary to adopt building performance strategies that go beyond the typical meteorological year. And as a user, I would love to have really clear guidelines and accessible processes, user-friendly processes, where we can have daylight performance modeling for a range of possible future climate conditions, not only possible, but commonplace, to really design for resilience. I'm sure John will be talking much more about this, so I will definitely be here there in his talk. This is the breakout stage after lunch. And my second point is about establishing the value of daylight. This ties back to all these topics that were discussed this morning. And of course, in a warming world, this means that we will have an increased demand for cooling. And while reading the IPCC report, they recommend sufficiency measures, which means reducing the energy demand. For homes, this would mean smaller homes, downsizing dwellings. And as I was reading, something that struck me is that they say, okay, of course, this will lower the energy demand, especially if the volume of the space is reduced and window areas are reduced. Of course, it depends how big those windows were, but to me, this shows two sources of pressure for limiting daylight access. One, a warmer climate with growing risk for overheating, and second, urban densification and a growing population, as Marcel pointed out before. And I don't need to convince you about what we're losing along with daylight access. You are the perfect audience for this. What I'd like to urge you to do is to really, in your own fields of expertise, identify what are the barriers, if any, for really safeguarding the amount of daylight that you think is necessary for these benefits. What are the barriers? Do we need more research? Do we need more consensus? Is it a matter of communication between research and practice? Is it a matter of lack of interest from stakeholders? Do we need to put more effort in translating these benefits to monetary values? We saw this amazing breakthrough from the indoor air community. So indeed, how can we do the same for daylight? In my lab, as you'll see, we're specifically focusing on effects on cognitive, affective, physiological, and clinical restoration in Osge's work. She will present much more about this. Last point, cross-disciplinary synergies. And in a warming world, I think what's really interesting is visual thermal interactions. It's an obvious link. And there have been studies from the Lipid Lab of EPFL where in high temperature participants were more thermally comfortable under low compared to high illuminance. And we see similar effects with greenery, where viewing greenery, so having greenery in your field of view, led to a lower thermal sensation, to a cooler thermal sensation. And if we convert these effects to operative temperature using existing models, these could range from around 1 to up to 4 degrees, depending on how optimistic the effect and the model is. This is something that I find really interesting, and we're also working in this direction with Eleonora and other colleagues from TU Delft. So maybe next time we'll meet, I have more to say about that. So, yeah, increasing HVAC set point temperature is suggested to reduce the energy demand for cooling. And making use of visual thermal interactions could be a way to support this approach. So for me, it would be very interesting to see this as a growing trend of systematically investigate the potential of visual thermal interactions, taking also into account how generalizable and robust these effects are over time. And that was it. Thank you for bearing with me, and I'm really looking forward to discussing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kynthia.